The sky was heartbreakingly blue, the kind of blue that made you want to believe everything was perfect, even when your stomach knew better. Sarah stepped out of the car and into a scene that looked like a dream. Lavender balloons drifting lazily in the breeze, streamers rippling like silk ribbons across Colette's pristine front porch. But all she could feel was the tight ache behind her ribs, the sense that something was off kilter, tilted just slightly, like a picture frame hanging crooked on a wall no one dared to fix. I'm about to share something personal, but first, drop your city or country in the comments. In her arms was a gift basket filled with love, real love. Handmade blanket, curated baby books, organic onesies wrapped in tissue she'd ironed flat. 20 years of friendship deserved nothing less. Bennett stood beside her like stone. His hands were fists, his shoulders rigid. She glanced at him, already knowing the answer to the question she hadn't yet asked. Don't, she said quietly. Please don't do this today. He didn't speak, just stared at the house with his doctor's eyes, those eyes that missed nothing. Not the unnatural stillness in Colette's movements, not the carefully arranged smiles, not the lies, barely hidden behind all the lavender and light. The door burst open. Sarah! Colette's voice rang out, sweet and high and too bright. She looked angelic, blonde waves, pale pink dress flowing around her body, a crown of roses nestled into her perfect hair, and the bump, so obvious, so staged. Sarah tried to push the thought away. Colette pulled her in for a hug, but twisted her body slightly, so they barely touched. Careful, she giggled, patting her belly. You'll squash the little one. Something in Sarah faltered. You look amazing, she said out loud. And it was true, but also false. Everything felt performed. Inside the house, it was a stage. Streamers, florals, champagne flutes for the non-pregnant, mocktails served at a marble bar. A glowing sign read, "It's a girl," in cursive pink. Colette floated through it all like a starlet at her own premiere. Bennett accepted a drink from Alaric but didn't sip. His gaze swept the room, methodical, surgical. Sarah touched his arm. What is going on with you? He hesitated, his jaw clenched. Then he leaned in, voice low, sharp as glass. We have to go. What? His hand gripped hers, not hard, but tight, intentional. Now, Sarah, he whispered, before it's too late. She looked around, at the house, at the guests, at her best friend, laughing in the center of it all like nothing had ever been wrong. Then back at her husband, and for the first time in 20 years, Sarah felt afraid. The living room pulsed with music and polite laughter, the scent of lavender so thick it made Sarah lightheaded. The photographer moved silently between guests, capturing curated joy, while Colette played hostess like she was born for it, cradling her bump, fluttering her fingers, tossing her hair at just the right angle. It was all flawless, too flawless. Sarah! Sierra's voice cut through the hum, and suddenly she was wrapped in a paint-smudged hug. Her boho dress swayed around her ankles, her fingers stained with faded indigo. It's been forever. 6 months, Sarah smiled. Hardly forever. In artist time? Eternity. Behind her, Opal appeared, curls bouncing, therapist's gaze already scanning Sarah's face like it could read everything beneath the surface. You look tired, she said gently. You okay? Before Sarah could answer, Gage lingered into view. Colette's younger brother, broader now, his gangly teenage frame long gone. His smile was small. Nice to see you. You too, Sarah replied, pulse stuttering as his eyes lingered just a moment too long. She felt Bennett watching them from across the room. Not jealous, not exactly, just assessing. Everyone's here, Colette chimed from behind them, beaming as she slipped between guests. Now I can show you the nursery mock-up. You won't believe it. She led them upstairs, voice lilting with excitement, all about organic wallpaper and non toxic paints. The second bedroom had been transformed into a magazine spread. Crystal chandelier, hand painted forest mural, shelves already filled with books. Everything looked untouched. Everything looked staged. It's stunning, Sierra gasped. Sarah nodded, but her eyes lingered on the crib, still in plastic, and the changing table with no wipes, no supplies, no signs of real use. It was all donated, Colette said quickly, almost too quickly. Vendors who support our foundation. It's networking, really. Opal raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Colette's smile tightened, then vanished. At the edge of the room, Bennett stood in the doorway, phone in hand. He wasn't taking pictures. He was zooming in on details. Labels, brands, receipts still visible in some of the packaging. When Sarah caught his eye, he slipped the phone into his pocket and turned away. Downstairs, the noise resumed. Games, laughter, another toast. But Sarah stayed back for a moment, watching Bennett. He hadn't touched his drink. He hadn't smiled once. She moved to his side. You're acting like you're casing a crime scene. He didn't look at her. Maybe I am. The chill that ran through her then had nothing to do with the spring air. The nursery was a dream, soft pinks and creamy whites, with a crystal chandelier catching the light like drops of sugar. A mural of deer and rabbits sprawled across one wall, each brushstroke delicate and deliberate. A plush armchair sat beside a bookshelf filled with untouched classics, their spines too perfect to have been read. Everything in the room whispered serenity, perfection, love. But to Sarah, it all began to feel like a set. It's gorgeous, Opal said, trailing her fingers along the painted leaves. Almost too gorgeous. Colette beamed from the doorway, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other gesturing toward the crib. And the best part? All donated. These vendors are incredible. They just want their work showcased, you know? Sarah forced a smile. Of course. Across the room, Bennett stood silently by the dresser. He wasn't admiring the wallpaper or complimenting the color palette like everyone else. Instead, he held his phone low, the camera angled upward, quietly snapping photos of unopened packages, untouched supplies, price tags still dangling from the baby mobile above the crib. Sarah caught him mid-click. "What are you doing?" she whispered as she stepped beside him. "Nothing," he muttered, locking the screen and slipping the phone into his pocket. "Just documenting." "Why?" He didn't answer, just shook his head slightly. "Not here." They joined the others as Colette moved on to another story. Something about custom diaper bags and a sustainable stroller that hadn't arrived yet. She spoke with the same kind of practiced enthusiasm Sarah had heard from influencers rehearsing their brand partnerships. Every word had polish, every laugh was perfectly timed, but none of it landed quite right. Later, as the sun began to dip and the guests were distracted by a round of baby trivia downstairs, Bennett pulled Sarah aside near the kitchen hallway. "We need to talk," he said under his breath. "Bennett, if this is about earlier, it is, and it's not nothing." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then just say it." He hesitated, eyes flicking to make sure no one was near. "I don't think she's pregnant." The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Sarah blinked. "What?" "She's not showing any real signs. No swelling, no waddling, no change in her face or hands. She moves like someone pretending to be pregnant. She's careful, too careful." "You're basing this on what? A gut feeling?" "I'm basing it on clinical observation," he said, voice low but certain. "And what I saw in that room." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. The untouched nursery, the way Colette never let anyone touch her belly, the silence when asked about doctor appointments, the bump, always just slightly hidden behind fabric or furniture. "You're wrong," she said finally. "I hope I am," Bennett replied. God, I hope I am. The car was silent except for the hum of the tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of the gift bag in the back seat. Sarah stared out the window, watching the lavender balloons in the distance grow smaller until they disappeared entirely. The air between her and Bennett was thick, charged, like a storm was about to break, and neither of them wanted to say who'd brought the clouds. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles pale. She waited for him to speak, to laugh it off, to say he was being paranoid. Instead, she's lying. Sarah turned toward him, slowly. Excuse me? Colette, he said, eyes fixed ahead. She's not pregnant. The words landed harder this time, stripped of the earlier hesitation. You already said that, back there, when you pulled me away like we were escaping a hostage situation. Her voice rose. At my best friend's baby shower. I know how it sounds. No, you don't. She crossed her arms, her heartbeat quickening. You don't just accuse someone, especially Colette, of faking a pregnancy. He exhaled, jaw tight. When I went to the bathroom, I passed her office. The door was open. I saw some paperwork on the desk. So you were snooping. I was looking, he said, because things weren't adding up. There were lab reports, blood panels that don't make sense for someone 7 months along. Her HCG levels were off, like first trimester levels, maybe earlier. Sarah blinked. You memorized her blood work? I'm a doctor, Sarah. I know what I'm looking at. She didn't respond, just stared at him, waiting for it to sound less impossible. And then, he continued, voice quieter now, I heard Alaric on the phone. He didn't see me. He was in the hallway, near the back. He said, she's starting to believe it herself. We need to speed this up. Oh. The chill that rolled through Sarah's body wasn't from the air conditioning. You must have misheard. I didn't. Then maybe it's about something else, she snapped. Her foundation, her speaking schedule, anything but this. Bennett finally glanced at her. His eyes were tired but sure. When was the last time you actually touched her stomach? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Thought back to the hug on the porch, the way Colette had pulled back, the careful choreography of every embrace, every photo, the long dresses, the flowing tops, the angle of her body always slightly turned. She's private, Sarah said, but her voice was softer now. So private even you've never gone to an appointment with her? Bennett asked gently. Even once? Sarah looked out at the window again. The clouds were building in the distance, and for the first time, she couldn't tell if the storm was behind them or waiting up ahead. The next morning, Sarah stood in the kitchen, cradling a mug of coffee she'd forgotten to sip. The steam curled toward her face, but the warmth didn't reach her. Bennett had already left for an early shift, leaving behind only the echo of last night's conversation and the soundless ache of something beginning to splinter. She opened her phone and scrolled through months of photos. Colette smiling beside her at the gender reveal, at the brunch they'd hosted for her nonprofit, at their last lunch downtown. Always radiant, always dressed in floaty dresses and soft wraps, always posed. In every image, Colette's hands cradled her bump, posed just so. Her shoulders angled slightly, one foot forward, camera never straight on. The bump was there, yes, but the more Sarah looked, the more it began to feel curated, like a detail that belonged to a costume rather than a body. And something else? In every photo, there was distance, physical, emotional. Colette was glowing, yes, but never touched. No hand on her stomach from Alaric, no accidental candid of her shifting uncomfortably, or rubbing her back, or sitting gingerly the way heavily pregnant women did. Only grace, only poise. Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened a video from 2 months ago. Colette was seated at a baby store, flipping through a registry on an iPad. Sarah remembered thinking how lucky she was. No swollen ankles, no back pain, no food aversions. But now, the memory rewrote itself. Colette had barely moved, never adjusted her dress, never once mentioned nausea or fatigue or the insomnia that had kept Sarah herself up during her own pregnancies with her nieces and nephews. Had Colette ever gone to St. Elizabeth's? Had Sarah ever actually seen an appointment reminder? She thought back, suddenly aware that every time she'd offered to go with her, Colette had said no with a bright laugh. It's just routine, nothing exciting. I'll call you after. She always had the perfect excuse. Sarah pressed her mug to her lips, but the coffee had gone cold. Her stomach churned. And yet, hadn't she noticed some of this before? Tiny things, moments that felt off, but were quickly explained away by Colette's charm or Sarah's own unwillingness to dig deeper. Because who questions their best friend about something so sacred? She felt her heart stutter with something dangerously close to guilt. There had always been something theatrical about Colette, hadn't there? In high school, her heartbreaks were epic. Her victories paraded. She never just was. She performed. Sarah closed the photo gallery, setting her phone down with a quiet thud. Bennett might be wrong. He might be. But the certainty that once lived in Sarah's chest had started to slip through the cracks, and she didn't know how to patch it back together. The house looked different without the party, too quiet, too still. The streamers were gone, but a lone lavender balloon clung to the porch railing, half deflated and swaying in the breeze like a tired smile. Sarah stood at the door, rehearsing her lie. She rang the bell twice before it opened. Mairead blinked at her through a tangle of messy curls, dressed in sweatpants and one of Colette's old college tees. Sarah? She asked, surprised but not unkind. Everything okay? Hey, yeah, I think I left my shawl here yesterday. Colette said you'd let me in. Oh, right. Mairead stepped aside, waving her in. It's probably with the gift stuff. Come on. Inside, the house felt hollow without guests to fill it. The soft scent of flowers lingered, but underneath was something sharper. Coffee, maybe, and a hint of something burnt. A half-eaten steak sat cold on a plate in the dining room next to an open bottle of red wine. Sarah paused. Heavy meal for a baby shower? Mairead flushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Oh, that's Alaric's. Late dinner, I think. Colette didn't. She stopped. She had something else, something pregnancy-friendly. Sarah nodded slowly, storing that slip like a loose thread she'd come back to pull later. The living room was still cluttered with unopened gifts. Sarah moved carefully through the mess, pretending to scan for her imaginary shawl. Her eyes lingered on a stack of thank you cards, already half written in Colette's looping script. Check upstairs? Mairead offered. Maybe it got tossed in the nursery. Mind if I? I'll come with. No, it's fine. I know the way. Sarah climbed the stairs, her footsteps muffled by plush carpet. The nursery was as untouched as before. Cribs still wrapped in plastic, baby clothes still on hangers. A soft hush filled the space, like it was waiting for a child who hadn't yet been invited. She moved toward the dresser, brushing her fingers along the edge. Then she saw it, just barely visible behind the changing table. A corner of something black, leather-bound, wedged between the furniture and the wall. A journal. Sarah's fingers hesitated before slipping it free. She opened to the first page. My dearest daughter, though you're not yet in my arms, you are already in my heart. The handwriting was unmistakable. Each page a letter, hopeful, desperate, dated years ago. Footsteps thudded below. Sarah shoved the journal into her bag and started toward the stairs when she heard it. Colette's voice, low and clipped, drifting in through an open window near the hallway. I don't care what he thinks. Once the donation clears, this is over. A pause. Then, too much invested. We're not backing out now? Sarah froze, heart pounding. Donation. What donation? She crept down the stairs just as the front door opened again. Colette's laugh echoed faintly, high and sharp, like glass waiting to crack. Back home, Sarah sat at the edge of the bed, the journal heavy in her lap. The leather cover was worn at the corners, softened by hands that had opened it again and again. She hesitated, one finger tracing the edge, before finally flipping it open. My dearest daughter, the first page began, though you're not yet in my arms, you are already in my heart. The date stopped her cold, 3 years ago. She turned the pages slowly, each one a letter, sometimes hopeful, sometimes angry, sometimes almost frantic in its need to be heard. The handwriting was unmistakably Colette's, slanted and elegant, with loops that curled like they belonged on invitations, not confessions. They don't understand. They say it's not possible, that I should accept reality. But mothers know. Mothers always know. Sarah felt a shiver crawl up her spine. This wasn't just grief. It wasn't just loss. It was something deeper, a need that hadn't ended when the pregnancy did, if there ever was one. She flipped forward through seasons of imagined milestones, first flutters, first cravings, nursery colors chosen and rechosen, names circled and underlined. There were no mentions of Alaric, no doctors, no test results or appointments, just longing, just Colette writing into a void she refused to accept was empty. And then, toward the end, one entry caught Sarah's breath in her throat. My miracle girl. Everyone finally believes now. The donations are flowing in. Soon we'll have everything we need to bring you home properly. Just a little longer now, and no one will be able to take you from me again. The date was 2 weeks ago. Sarah stared at the words, her mind spinning. Colette hadn't fabricated this recently. The shower wasn't a spontaneous spiral. This had roots, deep ones. This was the climax of a story Colette had been telling herself and everyone else for years. A story carefully nurtured, shaped, rehearsed. She closed the journal, nausea rising in her throat. What had started as a private grief had grown into something dangerous, something theatrical. This wasn't about a baby anymore. It was about being seen, being believed, being loved as the woman who had overcome heartbreak to create life. And Sarah, for all her good intentions, had been part of it, smiling in pictures, planning gifts, repeating the story, reinforcing the illusion. She looked out the window, the afternoon sun slanting low through the trees, painting golden lines across the floor. Everything in her wanted to believe this was still salvageable, that there was still a line between heartbreak and deceit. But the journal in her lap whispered otherwise. This wasn't just Colette lying to the world. She'd lied to herself first. The cabin sat like a secret at the edge of Lake Morrison, half shadowed beneath tall pines, the gravel driveway crunching under Sarah's tires as she pulled in. She hadn't been there in years, not since the summer after college when she and Colette spent lazy afternoons tanning on the dock and dreaming about the futures they'd shape. Now the place looked smaller, emptier. Colette's white SUV was already parked beneath the carport. The porch light was on, even in daylight. Sarah climbed the steps, heart pounding against her ribs. She barely had time to knock before the door creaked open. Colette stood barefoot in the doorway, wrapped in an oversized sweater that swallowed her frame. Her face was bare, pale, eyes rimmed in red. There was no bump, no glow, no crown of flowers or painted smile. You knew, she said simply, not a question. Sarah nodded. I need to hear it from you. Colette stepped back wordlessly, letting her inside. The air in the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old summers, and something else. Regret, maybe. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the lake visible in slivers through the dusty windows. Colette pulled her legs beneath her the way she always had, like a girl trying to vanish inside herself. I was pregnant, she said quietly. A year ago, 8 weeks. Alaric was in London. I miscarried alone. Sarah said nothing, afraid the smallest noise might shatter the moment. I didn't tell anyone, Colette continued, staring down at her hands. You'd just gotten that promotion. Everyone was so proud of you, and I couldn't. I couldn't add my sadness to your joy. So you kept it a secret. I thought I was coping. I really did. But then the fundraiser came up, the one for the maternal health initiative, and I was supposed to speak, but I had a panic attack in the bathroom. I kept saying I'd failed, that I wasn't enough. Her voice caught. And Alaric said, "What if you didn't have to tell them?" Sarah's breath hitched. He suggested it? No, not exactly. He gave me a way out, a version of the truth people could celebrate. And when they clapped for me, Sarah, when they smiled, I felt like someone again. Sarah looked away, her throat tight. So you just continued. It snowballed. The bump, the shower, the donations, each lie easier because people wanted to believe them. You wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe you, Sarah said softly. Colette finally looked at her. I didn't fake everything. I couldn't let it go. The idea of her, the love I got because of her. It felt more real than the truth. Silence settled between them, heavy as stone. And then Colette whispered, Tell me you understand. Sarah stared at her friend, a stranger now in the body she thought she knew, and for the first time, she didn't know if understanding was enough. The folder sat between them like a loaded weapon. Colette opened it slowly, her fingers trembling just enough for Sarah to notice. Inside were spreadsheets, donor letters, printed emails, check copies, neat columns, highlighted figures, all of it real. This isn't a scam, Colette said, eyes bright with something between pride and desperation. The money went to the foundation. It helped real people. We funded prenatal clinics, distributed supplies, paid for ultrasounds in rural areas, things that actually matter. Sarah flipped through the pages, her stomach twisting. Everything was legitimate, down to the tax receipts and signed partnership contracts. It was the baby who wasn't. And they donated because they believed you were pregnant, Sarah said, not quite a question. Colette held her gaze. They donated because they cared, because they saw someone who had suffered and wanted to give that suffering meaning. That's what donors respond to, emotion, personal connection. If I told them the truth, do you think they'd have opened their checkbooks? So you lied to manipulate grief into money, Sarah said, voice harder than she meant, into purpose. I channeled grief into impact, Colette snapped. There's a difference. Sarah set the folder down carefully. Her fingers ached from holding it. You pretended to carry life to raise money for people who actually are. And I did help them, Colette insisted. Every cent went to the cause. I didn't buy shoes or spa weekends. I built mobile clinics. I got formula to mothers who couldn't afford it. I made something good out of something broken. Sarah stared at her, searching the face she'd once trusted with everything. But what about the families who donated because they saw you and thought, she gets it? What about the people who named their babies after yours? Or promised legacies because they thought you were honoring their grief? Colette's lips parted, but no sound came. That's not inspiration, Sarah continued. That's exploitation wrapped in pretty language. Silence stretched between them, thick with something neither could name. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Colette said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It just kept working. Every story I told made something real happen, so I kept telling them. Sarah looked down at the folder again, page after page of documented good, born from one staggering lie. She didn't know what scared her more, the magnitude of the deception, or how easy it was to justify when it came dressed in the costume of generosity. Where does it stop, Colette? Colette blinked like the question hadn't occurred to her. When it has to, she said, when there's no one left to believe it. Sarah stood slowly, her heart pounding. The truth had finally surfaced, but it didn't come with relief, only the sharp realization that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones told in the name of something good. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Penelope Graves speaking. Sarah gripped her coffee mug tighter. Mrs. Graves, it's Sarah Walker. We met at the Bright Futures Gala last year. I helped organize the grief support table. A pause. Yes, of course. You're the counselor. Sarah inhaled. I was hoping to ask you about your donation to New Beginnings, Colette Whitman's foundation. Another pause, sharper this time. Is something wrong? Sarah glanced out the kitchen window at the quiet street beyond, at the stillness of the morning that no longer felt peaceful. I'm just trying to understand a few things. She mentioned you were one of the lead donors. I was. Mrs. Graves' voice shifted, a note of pride seeping in. Edward always believed in maternal health care. It seemed fitting. Right, Sarah said gently. And was there any particular reason you felt drawn to Colette's story? There was a breath on the other end. She told me about her struggles, how she thought she'd never carry to term. And when she said she was finally pregnant, after so many disappointments, I saw myself in her. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She said if it was a girl, she'd name her Edwina, for my Edward. The voice softened. She said it would be a living memorial. Sarah closed her eyes. She and her husband had already agreed. It meant the world to me. Of course, Sarah whispered. She hasn't changed her mind, has she? Mrs. Graves asked, suddenly wary. She hasn't lost the baby? Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm not sure. I just needed to confirm some things. Thank you for your time. She ended the call before she could break. The quiet in the kitchen was unbearable now. Sarah pressed her palms to the counter, bracing herself against the rise of nausea. A baby's name, a dead husband's name. Colette hadn't just leaned on empathy, she'd harvested grief and repackaged it as hope, tailored to each donor's wound. It wasn't improvisation, it was strategy. Sarah opened the drawer where she'd stashed the journal. She didn't read it again. She couldn't, but she held it like it might steady her. And for the first time, she understood the full weight of what Colette had done. This wasn't grief spiraling into delusion. It wasn't a woman lost in mourning. It was a woman building an empire on borrowed heartbreak, and she'd sold the idea of a daughter, not for money, but for meaning, for legacy, for control. Sarah set the journal down with trembling hands. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was standing on the fault line of something calculated, and the ground was starting to crack. It started with a single post. Sarah found it late at night, long after Bennett had fallen asleep, when the house was dark and too quiet, and her nerves refused to rest. She wasn't tagged, but someone had forwarded it in a private message. Fraud alert. Local nonprofit director faking pregnancy to secure donations. She clicked the link with trembling fingers. There it was, Colette's name in bold, the photo from her baby shower, the glowing pink sign. It's a girl lit behind her like a damning halo. Screenshots followed, social media posts, registry links, a video clip of her holding her belly and laughing, time-stamped just 3 weeks earlier. The captions were worse. No birth certificate, no medical records, just money. Lots of it. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, useless. She didn't know who had written it. Someone at the shower? One of the donors? Mairead? By morning, the story had spread. The local parenting forum, Facebook, then the town subreddit. People commented in disbelief, outrage, vindication. Some defended Colette. citing mental illness, miscarriage, trauma. Others wanted justice. By noon, the media called it a scandal. Sarah's phone didn't stop vibrating. Texts from Sierra, from Opal, even Gage. Did you know? Is it true? What the hell happened? Colette's website went down. Her foundation's page redirected to a blank white screen. Alaric's social media accounts vanished. Colette's too. Voicemails rang out. Text sat unread. No one could reach her. She's gone, Gage said over the phone, voice hollow. She cleared her bank account and left the house this morning. I don't know where she went. Did she say anything to you? She called me crying, but I couldn't understand what she was saying. I think, I think she knew this was coming. Sarah hung up and turned on the TV. A local anchor read from a teleprompter, voice cool and clipped. Police confirmed they are reviewing a fraud complaint against Colette Whitman, director of New Beginnings Maternal Care, after allegations surfaced claiming she faked a pregnancy to solicit charitable donations. Bennett came home an hour later, still in his scrubs, face drawn. They contacted me, he said. The hospital. The board wants to know everything I saw, what I said, what I didn't. And what did you say? The truth, that I had concerns, that I never saw medical confirmation. He paused. Did you tell anyone? Only one donor. She didn't post it. Someone else must have. They stood in the kitchen in stunned silence, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud. Sarah looked down at her phone. Another message, another question. But the only one that echoed in her mind was this. How long had they all been complicit in pretending not to see? Because now no one could look away. The knock was barely audible above the rain. A soft, hesitant tap, once, then again. Sarah froze, heart stuttering. It was past midnight, and the house had been quiet for hours. Bennett was still at the hospital, called in last minute. She crossed the living room in slow steps, the kind you take when you already know who's on the other side. Through the peephole, Colette stood hunched on the porch, soaked to the skin. Her blonde hair clung in limp strands to her cheeks, her sweater hanging heavy with water. No umbrella, no coat, no bump. Sarah opened the door. Colette didn't say a word. She just looked at her, eyes hollow, face stripped of every illusion she'd carefully worn for months. She looked smaller, older, fragile in a way Sarah had never seen. Then, without asking, she stepped forward, collapsing into Sarah's arms like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah staggered slightly but caught her. Colette's body was trembling, cold seeping through the wet fabric. Sarah wrapped her in a blanket and led her to the couch without speaking. Colette curled into herself, shivering. The silence was louder than any scream. Sarah returned with a towel and a mug of tea that would likely go untouched. She sat across from her, hands folded tight. Finally, Colette spoke. Her voice was hoarse. I didn't know where else to go. Sarah nodded slowly. You shouldn't have come, but I knew you would. I have nothing left. Colette looked up, tears brimming. They're going to charge me, aren't they? Sarah didn't answer right away. She studied her friend, her best friend once, and all the pieces that had fallen away from the woman she thought she knew. There's no undoing this, Colette. I know. Her voice broke. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I just needed to be somewhere where someone remembers who I used to be. Sarah leaned forward. I remember, but I also see who you've become, and they're not the same. Colette flinched like the words had slapped her. You lied, Sarah continued, voice low but steady, not just to donors or strangers, to people who loved you, people who trusted you. I didn't know how to stop. You did. You just didn't want to. Sarah's throat tightened. You wanted the love more than the truth. Colette let out a broken laugh. I didn't know they weren't the same. Sarah stared at her for a long moment, then stood. You can sleep here tonight, but in the morning, you need to go. Where? To the police, to a lawyer, somewhere that isn't here. Colette pulled the blanket tighter, nodding without looking up. Sarah turned off the light on her way to the stairs. The couch behind her was quiet, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was abandoning Colette. She felt like she was finally setting both of them free. The knock on the door this time was hard and official. Two officers stood on the porch, their cruiser idling in the driveway. Colette sat quietly at the kitchen table, wrapped in the same blanket Sarah had given her the night before. Her face was calm, unreadable. "They have a warrant," Sarah said softly. "I figured." Colette rose slowly, movements deliberate. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She just looked around the kitchen like she might never see it again. Her eyes landed on Sarah. "Will you be there?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, "but I'll tell the truth." Colette gave a slow nod, then turned toward the door. As she stepped past Sarah, she paused. "You were the only real thing in all of it. You know that, right?" Sarah didn't answer. She watched as the door closed behind her, the cruiser pulling away until only the sound of rain remained. Weeks passed, then months. Sarah sat in a stiff chair at the courthouse, heart pounding as she took the stand. She told them what she knew about the journal, the staged nursery, the whispered phone calls. She didn't speak about the name Colette had promised to Penelope Graves. She didn't mention the night Colette had shown up, soaked and broken, at her door. She walked a line between honesty and protection. "Was she your friend?" the attorney asked. Sarah's eyes blurred as she looked across the courtroom at the woman she had once told every secret to. "She was," she said, "and maybe she still is, somewhere." Colette didn't meet her gaze. Her lawyer whispered to her, but she kept her hands folded in her lap, her face a blank mask. The judge agreed to a deal: probation, restitution, and mandatory inpatient psychiatric treatment. The nonprofit dissolved quietly. The donors issued statements. The town moved on, because it always does. But Sarah didn't, not yet. One quiet October morning, an envelope arrived. No return address, just her name and handwriting she knew better than her own. She opened it slowly. "Sarah, they tell me writing this is part of my recovery, that I have to acknowledge what I've done, that I have to face it instead of rewriting it in prettier words. I lied, over and over, to the world, to myself, to you. But in the end, it was you who saved me, not with comfort, but with clarity. You stopped playing along. You looked at me and saw past the performance. That hurt more than anything. But it was the truth, and I needed it. I don't expect you to write back. I just needed you to know. I remember who we were, and I'm trying to find her again. Colette." Sarah folded the letter and slipped it into a box in the back of her closet, beside old photos, a broken friendship bracelet, and a strip of blue fabric from a shawl that never existed. Closure, maybe, or something like it.